They hanged her for marrying a native man, until the thunder of 200 Comanche riders shook the earth beneath the gallows where the widow once stood condemned. The townsfolk had dismissed her as nothing more than a shameful reminder of misplaced loyalty, a black woman who chose disgrace over her own kind. They expected her story to end with rope and dirt, another cautionary tale whispered in Sunday sermons. But the silent mountain man who watched from the shadows knew what they didn't. Her husband's blood brothers were coming, and they remembered every promise made to the fallen warrior. The woman's fate now hung between two choices that would reshape the frontier forever. Would ancient bonds of honor bring justice through wisdom, or would the approaching war party arrive too late to prevent the ultimate betrayal of everything her marriage had died trying to build? The coins hit the dirt at Ruth Thompson's feet with sharp metallic pings. She knelt beside the wooden washboard, her dark hands working soap through another load of soiled linens. The water had long since turned gray. "That's for the shirts," Mrs. Henderson said from above. "Mind you get the stains out proper this time." Ruth nodded without looking up. The coins lay scattered in the dust like fallen stars. She would gather them later, when the watching eyes had moved on to other entertainments. Cedar Ridge bustled with its usual morning chaos. Wagons creaked down the main street. Horses stamped at hitching posts. Children chased each other between buildings while their mothers haggled over prices at the general store. It was 1867, and the Texas frontier town wore its civilization like an ill-fitting coat. But Ruth Thompson remained apart from it all, the widow who had shamed herself, the woman who chose wrong. She finished wringing out a pillowcase and draped it across the line. The fabric snapped in the prairie wind. Behind her, voices dropped to whispers. "Still can't believe she actually married one of them. Red Feather, they called him, savage name for a savage man. Well, she's paying for it now. Look at her." Ruth's hands never paused in their work. She had learned long ago that stillness was survival. Let them talk. Let them judge. Their words could not touch the memories she carried. When the sun reached its peak, Ruth packed her washing supplies into a canvas bag. The walk to Red Feather's grave took her beyond the town's borders, where the Texas hills rolled toward an endless sky. The marker was simple, a wooden cross with his name carved deep. Ruth knelt beside it and began to speak in fluid Comanche. The words flowed like music, each syllable precise and reverent. "The children learn quickly," she said in the native tongue. "Little Fox can read full sentences now. Bright Star knows her numbers to 100. She spoke of small victories and quiet hopes, of lessons taught in hidden places where two worlds might one day meet in peace. A twig snapped behind her. Ruth's shoulders tensed, but she did not turn around. Someone had been watching her for weeks now, always at a distance, always silent. "You understand what I'm saying," she said, still facing the grave. The footsteps approached slowly. Ruth finally looked over her shoulder. The man was tall and weathered, with gray threading through his dark hair. He wore buckskin and moved with the quiet grace of someone who had spent years in the wilderness. His eyes held the kind of depth that came from seeing too much. "Samuel Donovan," he said. "Most folks call me Hawk." "Ruth Thompson." She rose to her feet, brushing dirt from her knees. "You knew my husband." It was not a question. Hawk nodded. "Red Feather was a good man, better than most. Yet you stay silent while his widow scrubs floors for pennies." "I stay watchful." His gaze swept the horizon. "Things are changing, Mrs. Thompson. Not everyone wants peace." Ruth studied his face. There was something familiar about him, though she was certain they had never met. Something in the way he carried himself suggested authority, though he claimed none. "The children will be waiting," she said. "Dangerous game you're playing. Teaching children to read is hardly dangerous. Teaching Comanche children to read English is." Hawk's expression remained neutral, especially when tensions are running high. Ruth gathered her washing supplies. "Knowledge builds bridges, Mr. Donovan. Fear builds walls." She turned to leave, but Hawk's voice stopped her. "Your husband mentioned you once. Said you were the smartest person he'd ever known." Ruth's hand tightened on her bag's handle. "Red Feather said many things. He said you could have been anything, done anything, but you chose love instead." The words hung in the air between them. Ruth met Hawke's steady gaze. "Love chooses us, Mr. Donovan. We simply decide whether to honor it or deny it." She walked away without looking back, but she could feel his eyes following her down the hill. The afternoon brought more washing, more whispered comments, more coins thrown at her feet. Ruth worked with mechanical precision, her mind on other matters, on children who hungered for knowledge, on a husband's dream of two peoples living in harmony, on the stranger who spoke of changing times. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, Mayor Blanchard emerged from his office. He was a soft man grown hard at the edges, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Mrs. Thompson," he called across the street, "might I have a word?" Ruth folded the last of the day's laundry. "Of course, Mayor." Blanchard crossed to her, his boots clicking on the wooden walkway. "I trust you're settling in well to your circumstances." "I manage." "Good, good. We do try to take care of our own here in Cedar Ridge. Even those who have strayed from the path." Ruth said nothing. "The thing is," Blanchard continued, "I've been hearing troubling reports, stories about secret meetings, about certain activities that might be seen as disloyal." The mayor's words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. Ruth felt the first stirring of real danger. "I teach children their letters, Mayor Blanchard, nothing more." Of course, of course. Still, one must be careful. These are delicate times. The wrong word in the wrong ear could lead to unpleasant consequences. Ruth met his gaze directly. "I understand completely." Blanchard's smile widened. "I was certain you would." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Ruth standing alone in the gathering dusk. Around her, the town prepared for evening. Lamps flickered to life in windows. Families gathered for supper. But Ruth Thompson remained apart, carrying secrets that could reshape the frontier forever. If you are enjoying this story of how one woman's courage could change an entire territory forever, don't forget to comment where you are tuning in from to show how this story can connect us across any distances, backgrounds, and hearts. Because what will happen in the next 15 minutes in Cedar Ridge will completely change everything Ruth has worked to build. Dawn brought trouble riding hard into Cedar Ridge. Ruth knelt beside the creek where she always met the children. Little Fox and Bright Star sat cross-legged on a fallen log, their fingers tracing letters in the dirt. 3 other Comanche children formed a circle around them, repeating English words in careful whispers. "Remember," Ruth said softly, "knowledge is a gift that can never be taken away." Little Fox looked up from her letters. "Will we see you tomorrow, Teacher Ruth?" "Always," Ruth replied, though something cold twisted in her stomach. The sound of horses reached them first, then voices, angry voices growing closer. Ruth stood quickly. "Go, all of you." Now, the children scattered like startled birds, disappearing into the brush with practiced silence. Ruth remained by the creek, calmly gathering the teaching materials she had spread on the ground. Deputy Collins emerged from the tree line first, followed by 3 other men from town. Their faces carried the hard satisfaction of hunters who had found their prey. "There she is," Collins said. "Caught red-handed." Ruth folded the last piece of paper and placed it in her satchel. "Good morning, Deputy. Lovely day for a ride. Don't play innocent with us." Collins dismounted and strode toward her. "We saw them, the savage children, running back to their camp like guilty secrets." "I saw children practicing their letters," Ruth said. "Nothing more. Teaching enemies our language is treason, woman. Pure and simple." The other men formed a loose circle around her. Ruth recognized them all. Mr. Patterson from the bank, young Tommy Mills who worked at the livery, Sam Carter who ran the saloon, men whose clothes she had washed, whose coins she had gathered from the dirt. "Mayor Blanchard wants to see you," Collins said. "Right now." Ruth slung her satchel over her shoulder. "Then we should not keep the mayor waiting." The ride back to town felt like a funeral procession. Ruth walked while the men rode, their horses snorting and stamping around her. Eyes watched from every window as they made their way down Main Street. Whispers followed in their wake. Mayor Blanchard stood waiting on the steps of his office, his arms crossed over his chest. His smile had vanished entirely. "Mrs. Thompson," he said as they approached, "I believe we discussed this matter yesterday." "We did indeed. Yet here you are, caught in direct defiance of my warning." Ruth climbed the steps until she stood face to face with him. "I was teaching children to read, Mayor Blanchard. The same skill you use to read your morning paper." Blanchard's face darkened. "Those children are not our concern. They are the enemy's concern. They are children. They are future warriors who will use our own language against us." A crowd had gathered in the street below. Ruth could feel their hunger for drama, for someone to blame for their fears. "Emergency town council meeting," Blanchard announced to the crowd. "1 hour. We have a matter of sedition to address." The word hit the crowd like lightning. Sedition, treason, the kind of charge that carried only one sentence on the frontier. Ruth was escorted to the small jail behind the sheriff's office. The cell smelled of unwashed bodies and despair. She sat on the narrow cot and waited while the town prepared to judge her. Through the barred window, she could see people hurrying toward the town hall. Their faces carried excitement mixed with righteous anger. They had found their villain at last. Samuel Hawke appeared at her window just as the sun reached its peak. "This is bad," he said without preamble. "I know. Blanchard's been planning this. He needed a reason to escalate tensions with the Comanche." Ruth studied his weathered face. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Hawke was quiet for a long moment. "Your husband saved my life once, up in Colorado Territory, 3 years ago. He never mentioned you. Red Feather was a man who kept confidences." Hawke's eyes held memories he did not share. "He spoke of you, though, said you gave up everything to be with him." Ruth's throat tightened. "Not everything. I gained more than I lost." "Did you? Look where you are now." "I am exactly where I choose to be." The sound of raised voices drifted from the direction of the town hall. Blanchard's voice rose above the rest, sharp and commanding. "They're deciding your fate," Hawke said. "Let them decide. Fate has a way of surprising us all." Hawke pulled something from his coat, a worn leather journal bound with rawhide cord. "Red Feather wanted you to have this if anything happened to him." Ruth took the journal with trembling hands. Red Feather's handwriting covered the visible pages, detailed notes in both English and Comanche, maps, names, dates. "What is this?" "Read it," Hawke said. "Then you'll understand why they really killed him." Before Ruth could ask what he meant, the sound of marching feet filled the air. The town council was returning with their verdict. Deputy Collins appeared with a ring of keys. Behind him came Mayor Blanchard and 5 other council members. Their faces carried the weight of momentous decision. "Ruth Thompson," Blanchard announced, "you have been found guilty of sedition against the people of Cedar Ridge, of corrupting enemy children with forbidden knowledge, of betraying your own kind for savage loyalties." Ruth stood slowly, the journal clutched against her chest. "The sentence is death by hanging," Blanchard continued, "to be carried out at dawn tomorrow." The words echoed in the small jail cell. Ruth felt their weight but not their sting. She had expected this moment since the day she chose love over safety. "Do you have any final words?" Blanchard asked. Ruth looked past him to where Hawke stood in the shadows. His face was granite, but his eyes burned with promises. "Yes," she said clearly. "I regret nothing." Blanchard's smile returned, cold and satisfied. "We shall see about that, Mrs. Thompson, we shall see." As the men filed out, Ruth heard something that made her blood freeze. Hoofbeats, many hoofbeats, coming from the direction of Comanche territory. The children had made it home safely, and they had delivered more than just themselves. They had delivered news of their teacher's capture. The hammering started before sunrise. Ruth listened from her cell as the townsmen constructed her gallows in the street outside. Each blow of the hammer rang like a bell counting down her remaining hours. She sat on the narrow cot with Red Feather's journal open across her lap, reading by the thin light that filtered through the barred window. The pages revealed truths that made her heart race. Red Feather had been more than her husband, much more. The journal detailed meetings with government officials, peace negotiations, trade agreements between Comanche leaders and territorial authorities. Her husband had been a diplomat working towards something that had never been attempted before, a lasting peace. Ruth's fingers traced his careful handwriting. He had documented everything. Names of officials in Austin, details of weapon shipments, records of secret meetings held far from prying eyes, and on the final pages, a list of men who had worked to sabotage those peace efforts. Mayor Blanchard's name appeared again and again. The cell door clanged open. Hawk stood in the doorway with Deputy Collins behind him. "Visitors allowed 15 minutes," Collins said. "No more." Hawk entered and Collins locked the door again, though he remained close enough to overhear any conversation. "How are you holding up?" Hawk asked quietly. "Better than expected." Ruth closed the journal and slipped it beneath her pillow. "The sunrise should be beautiful." Hawk's eyes narrowed at her calm tone. Something passed between them, an understanding that words could not capture. "I need you to do something for me," Ruth said. "If things go badly, name it. There are letters under the loose floorboard in my cabin, behind the stove. Make sure they reach their intended recipients." Hawk nodded slowly. "Federal contacts." Ruth's silence was answer enough. Collins stepped closer. "Time's up." As Hawk prepared to leave, Ruth stood and moved to the cell bars. "Samuel," she said, using his first name for the first time. Red Feather chose his friends wisely. Hawk met her gaze. So did his wife. After he left, Ruth returned to the cot and opened the journal again. The morning light was stronger now, making Red Feather's words easier to read. She studied a particular page that showed detailed maps of weapon supply routes, routes that passed directly through Cedar Ridge, routes that Mayor Blanchard controlled. The hammering outside grew more intense. Voices shouted instructions. The gallows was taking shape, rising from the dusty street like a monument to fear and hatred. Ruth closed her eyes and thought of her students. Little Fox with her bright smile and eager questions. Bright Star who could calculate figures faster than most adults. The other children who hungered for knowledge despite the danger it brought. She had given them something precious. The ability to bridge two worlds through language and learning. Whatever happened to her today, that gift would survive. The sound of approaching horses made her open her eyes. Many horses, moving fast. Ruth went to the window and peered through the bars. In the distance, a dust cloud rose from the prairie, growing larger by the minute. Deputy Collins burst through the jail door, his face pale with panic. "They're coming," he gasped. "Riders, lots of them." Ruth's heart leaped. "How many?" "Looks like the whole tribe. Maybe 200 or more." Collins fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking. "This is your doing, isn't it? You sent word somehow." "I sent nothing. They're coming for you, for revenge." Ruth returned to her cot with surprising calm. "Perhaps they're coming for justice." Collins ran from the jail, shouting warnings to anyone who would listen. Within minutes, Ruth could hear the town erupting in panic. Doors slammed. Windows shuttered. Children cried as their parents pulled them indoors. But through it all, the hammering continued. The gallows would be completed on schedule. Mayor Blanchard appeared at her cell, flanked by 4 armed men. His face had lost all color, but his jaw remained set with determination. "This changes nothing," he declared. "The sentence stands. Even with 200 Comanche warriors approaching your town, especially with 200 warriors approaching, we will not negotiate with savages. We will not be intimidated." Ruth stood slowly, her hands steady despite everything. "What if they're not here to negotiate?" Blanchard's confidence wavered slightly. "What do you mean? What if they're here to witness?" Before Blanchard could respond, Hawk appeared in the doorway. His face was grim but not panicked. "They've stopped," he announced. "Half a mile out. Formed a line across the ridge." "Why aren't they attacking?" one of Blanchard's men asked. Hawk looked directly at Ruth. "Because they're waiting for something." Ruth felt a chill of understanding. She knew exactly what they were waiting for. Red Feather had taught her about Comanche honor codes, about the importance of witnessing great moments, about ensuring that truth was seen by many eyes so it could never be denied. They had come to watch justice be done, one way or another. "The execution proceeds as planned," Blanchard said, though his voice carried less conviction than before. "We will not be dictated to by threats." As the men filed out, Ruth opened Redfeather's journal one final time. On the last page, written in his careful hand, were words that made her smile despite everything. "Truth has a way of revealing itself when the moment is right. Trust in that truth, beloved. Trust in the power of what we have built together." Ruth closed the journal and held it against her heart. Outside, the hammering had stopped. The gallows stood ready. But on the ridge beyond town, 200 Comanche warriors waited in perfect silence. Their presence changed everything, even if no one understood how yet. The sun climbed higher. Ruth's final hour approached, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the sound of more horses approaching from a different direction entirely. The rope felt rough against Ruth's neck as they led her up the gallows steps. The entire town had gathered in the street below, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. 200 Comanche warriors remained motionless on the distant ridge, watching like silent judges. Mayor Blanchard climbed the platform beside her, his chest puffed with false bravado. But Ruth could see the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Any final words?" he asked loudly, playing to the crowd. Ruth surveyed the gathered townspeople. She recognized every face. The woman whose infected wound she had treated in secret. The man whose child she had saved from fever. The families whose laundry she had scrubbed for coins thrown in the dirt. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent street. "I have many words." She stepped forward, and something in her bearing made the crowd lean in despite themselves. Gone was the submissive widow who had endured their scorn. In her place stood a woman of unmistakable dignity and authority. "You believe you are hanging a traitor," Ruth began, "but you are about to make the gravest mistake in this town's history." Blanchard's face darkened. "Enough speeches. Execute the sentence." But Ruth continued, her voice growing stronger. "My name is Dr. Ruth Elizabeth Thompson. I graduated with highest honors from the Boston Medical College in 1862. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Dr. Thompson." Several people exchanged confused glances. "I served as a field surgeon during the war, saving the lives of over 300 soldiers. I came to Texas not as a refugee or a criminal, but as a physician seeking to build something unprecedented." Hawk stepped forward from the crowd, his badge glinting in the morning sunlight. A federal marshal's badge that no one had seen before. "She's telling the truth," he announced. "Dr. Thompson is under federal protection as part of a government peace initiative." Blanchard sputtered. "This is nonsense. Desperate lies from desperate people." Ruth's eyes found Mrs. Henderson in the crowd. "You remember last winter, don't you, Mrs. Henderson? When your daughter Sarah had the fever that wouldn't break. When Doc Miller had given up hope." Mrs. Henderson's face went pale. She remembered the mysterious woman who had appeared at her door with medicines that saved her child's life. The woman had asked for nothing in return and disappeared before dawn. "That was you," Mrs. Henderson whispered. Ruth nodded. "And you, Mr. Patterson, when gangrene threatened your leg after that riding accident. Someone cleaned and dressed that wound with surgical precision while you slept. Someone who left behind expensive medical supplies and never asked for payment." Patterson unconsciously touched his leg, now fully healed. His eyes widened with recognition. "I have been serving this community for over 2 years," Ruth continued. "Not as your laundress, not as your fallen woman, as your physician." The crowd stirred uneasily. How many of them owed their lives to the woman they had scorned? Deputy Collins coughed suddenly, a harsh sound that had plagued him for months. Ruth looked directly at him. "That cough will kill you within 6 months if left untreated. But there's a simple remedy. Willow bark tea with honey 3 times daily until the inflammation subsides." Collins stopped coughing abruptly, staring at her in shock. "How did you know?" "Because I'm a doctor," Ruth said simply. "I've been treating half this town without you realizing it." Blanchard grabbed the hangman's lever. "Enough of this circus. She dies now. But Hawk was already moving, his hand on his weapon. "Stand down, Mayor. By federal authority, this execution is suspended. You have no authority here." Hawk produced a leather folder from his coat, official papers with government seals. "Dr. Thompson is part of a federal peace commission. Killing her is an act of treason against the United States government." Ruth felt the rope loosen around her neck as confusion swept through the crowd. She reached into her dress and withdrew a small leather pouch that had been hidden there. "This contains quinine," she announced, holding up the pouch. "Enough to treat the cholera outbreak that's about to hit this region." Several people gasped. Cholera was every frontier town's nightmare. "You're lying," Blanchard said, but his voice lacked conviction. Ruth pointed toward the eastern horizon. "The Jameson family arrived yesterday from San Antonio. Their youngest child has been vomiting since dawn. Mrs. Jameson thinks it's travel sickness." She paused, letting that sink in. "It's not travel sickness, and without proper treatment, it will spread through this entire town within a week." Young Tommy Mills pushed through the crowd. "My ma sent me to fetch Doc Miller. The Jameson boy is real sick." The crowd turned toward Tommy, then back to Ruth. The implications were becoming clear. "I can stop this outbreak," Ruth said calmly. "I have the medicine. I have the knowledge. I've been preparing for this possibility since I arrived." She looked directly at Blanchard. "But I can't treat anyone from the end of a rope." The mayor's face had gone ashen. His grand gesture of authority was crumbling before his eyes. "You knew," Hawk said, studying Blanchard carefully. "You knew who she really was." Ruth nodded. "He's known for months. That's why Red Feather had to die. My husband was documenting Mayor Blanchard's weapon sales to rogue war parties, sales that required ongoing conflict to remain profitable." The crowd erupted in angry voices. Blanchard stepped backward, his hand moving toward his gun. But it was too late. The truth was out, spreading through the gathering like wildfire. On the distant ridge, the Comanche warriors remained perfectly still, waiting to see what justice would look like in the morning sun. Ruth descended the gallows steps, with the noose still hanging loose around her shoulders. The crowd parted before her, their faces a mixture of shame and desperate hope. Word of the cholera was spreading faster than wildfire. "The Jameson boy needs immediate attention," she said, removing the rope entirely. "Someone bring me clean water and white cloth." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward hesitantly. "Doctor, I have both at my store." The title felt strange on everyone's lips. Doctor, not widow, not traitor. Doctor. Ruth moved through the crowd with purpose, her medical training taking over. She knelt beside the Jameson wagon where 8-year-old Billy lay pale and sweating. His mother clutched his hand while his father paced nearby. One touch of the child's forehead confirmed Ruth's diagnosis. She opened her leather pouch and measured precise amounts of quinine powder into a tin cup. "Mix this with clean water," she instructed Mrs. Jameson. "1 spoonful every 2 hours until the fever breaks." While Ruth worked, Hawk kept his hand near his weapon and his eyes on Mayor Blanchard. The mayor stood frozen on the gallows platform, watching his carefully constructed world collapse. "You can't prove anything," Blanchard called out desperately. "These are the lies of a desperate woman." Ruth looked up from her patient. "Red Feather's journal contains detailed records of your weapon sales, dates, amounts, buyers, everything." She returned to treating Billy Jameson but continued speaking. "He documented how you sold rifles to Chief Black Wolf's war party, the same rifles they used to attack the Murphy settlement last month." The crowd's murmur turned ugly. 3 families had died in that attack, including children. "She has no proof," Blanchard insisted, but sweat now poured down his face. Hawk reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather-bound book. Red Feather's journal, passed to him by Ruth during their jail cell meeting. "Page 47, Hawk announced, opening the journal. "March 15th. Mayor Blanchard delivered 20 Spencer rifles to Black Wolf's band. Payment received in stolen cattle and gold dust." Deputy Collins stared at his boss in horror. "Mayor, tell them it's not true." Blanchard's silence spoke volumes. Ruth finished preparing Billy's medicine and stood to face the crowd. My husband wasn't just documenting crimes. He was building something revolutionary, a peace treaty that would end the cycle of violence forever. She gestured toward the ridge where the Comanche warriors waited. Those men didn't come for war. They came to honor Red Feather's memory and witness the completion of his work. Young Tommy Mills squinted toward the horizon. More riders coming, from the south this time. Everyone turned to look. A second group of horsemen approached, these flying a familiar flag. The Star of Texas, representing territorial authority. Federal commissioners, Hawk said with satisfaction. Right on schedule. Blanchard's face went white. You planned this, all of it. Ruth knelt again beside Billy Jameson, monitoring his breathing. I planned to save lives, Mayor. My husband's death changed the timeline, but not the mission. She looked up at the approaching officials. Those men carry signed papers from Austin, a peace treaty between the Comanche Nation and Texas Territory, the first of its kind. The crowd buzzed with excitement and confusion. A real peace treaty here in Cedar Ridge. Mrs. Henderson approached cautiously. Doctor, what you said about cholera. How many people are in danger? Without proper treatment, the entire town within a week. Ruth's voice was matter of fact. With proper treatment and quarantine measures, we can contain it completely. She began giving specific instructions. Boil all drinking water. Isolate anyone showing symptoms. Clean all surfaces with lye soap. The crowd listened intently, hanging on every word. Billy Jameson's eyes fluttered open. His fever had already begun to break. Mama, he whispered. Mrs. Jameson burst into tears of relief. He's better. Dr. Thompson, you saved my boy. The transformation was remarkable. The same people who had gathered to watch Ruth hang now looked at her with reverence and gratitude. She was no longer the widow who had shamed herself. She was their savior. Blanchard made one last desperate play. Even if she is a doctor, she still betrayed her own kind. She still chose them over us. Ruth stood slowly, her patience finally exhausted. I chose healing over hatred, Mayor. I chose building over destroying. I chose hope over fear. She gestured toward the Comanche warriors. Those men have lost sons and fathers to this conflict, just as you have. The only difference is they're willing to try something new. The federal commissioners were close enough now that their uniforms were visible. Official business was about to commence. Ruth addressed the crowd one final time. My husband died believing that two peoples could live in peace, that children could grow up without fear, that knowledge could bridge any divide. She looked directly at Little Fox and Bright Star, who had crept back into town despite the danger. His dream doesn't have to die with him. Hawk stepped forward with the journal. Mayor Blanchard, you're under arrest for illegal weapons trafficking, conspiracy, and the murder of Red Feather. Blanchard reached for his gun, but Collins was faster. The deputy, still processing his boss's betrayal, drew his weapon first. Don't make this worse than it already is, Collins said quietly. As the federal commissioners rode into town, Ruth felt Red Feather's presence beside her. His dream was finally within reach. The gallows stood empty now, a reminder of how close they had come to destroying everything. But justice, it seemed, had other plans. The federal commissioners dismounted in front of the empty gallows, their brass buttons glinting in the afternoon sun. Commissioner Hartwell, a stern man with silver hair, surveyed the scene with practiced eyes. Marshal Donovan, he said formally, status report. Hawk gestured toward Ruth, who was still tending to Billy Jameson. Dr. Thompson is safe, sir. The peace mission continues as planned. Commissioner Hartwell's gaze shifted to Mayor Blanchard, now standing with his hands behind his back under Deputy Collins's watchful eye. I see we have complications. Evidence of weapons trafficking and sabotage, Hawk replied, holding up Red Feather's journal. The mayor has been undermining federal peace efforts. Ruth approached the commissioners, her medical bag in hand. Gentlemen, we have more immediate concerns. Cholera has reached Cedar Ridge. Hartwell's expression grew grave. How extensive? One confirmed case, possibly more. I need to examine the entire population and establish quarantine protocols immediately. The commissioner nodded briskly. Whatever you need, doctor. The peace treaty depends on maintaining stability in this region. Ruth organized the townspeople into orderly lines for medical examination. Her transformation from condemned prisoner to community leader was complete. People who had thrown coins at her feet now sought her guidance desperately. Mrs. Henderson assisted by distributing clean water and cloth. Doctor, should we close the school? Keep it open, but check every child daily. Education continues, but with health precautions. Little Fox and Bright Star appeared at Ruth's side, their faces bright with hope. Their teacher had survived, and now she stood openly in the town center without fear. Will you teach us again? Little Fox asked in careful English. Ruth smiled. Every day. You and all the other children together. The implications were staggering. Integrated education on the Texas frontier. It had never been attempted before. Commissioner Hartwell approached with an ornate document case. Dr. Thompson, we're ready to proceed with the treaty ceremony. Ruth looked toward the ridge where the Comanche warriors waited. They need to see Chief Running Bear first, to verify his authority. A single rider detached himself from the warrior line and approached the town. The crowd fell silent as the Comanche chief rode down the main street with quiet dignity. Chief Running Bear was an imposing figure, his presence commanding respect without demanding it. He wore traditional dress mixed with modern elements, symbolizing the balance between two worlds. He dismounted near Ruth and spoke in fluent Comanche. She responded in the same language, their conversation flowing naturally. What are they saying? Someone whispered. Hawk translated. The chief is asking about her health and expressing sorrow for Red Feather's death. She's telling him that his son's dream lives on. Ruth switched to English so everyone could understand. Chief Running Bear, these people are ready to hear Red Feather's vision of peace. The chief nodded solemnly. When he spoke, his English was precise and formal. My son believed that all children should learn together. That healing should know no boundaries. That peace grows from understanding. Commissioner Hartwell stepped forward with the treaty document. This agreement establishes the Cedar Ridge Territory as a model for cooperation between peoples. Ruth felt Red Feather's presence strongly as the document was unrolled. His careful handwriting covered several pages of detailed provisions. Shared governance, Hartwell read aloud. Joint patrols, integrated schools, medical care for all residents regardless of background. The crowd listened intently as the revolutionary terms were explained. It was more than a peace treaty. It was a blueprint for a completely new kind of community. Mayor Blanchard struggled against his restraints. This is madness. You're destroying everything we've built. Chief Running Bear looked at him with calm eyes. We are building what you were too afraid to imagine. Ruth began examining more townspeople for cholera symptoms. 3 additional cases emerged, all from families who had recently traveled. She worked methodically, establishing isolation protocols and dispensing medicine. The outbreak can be contained, she announced to the commissioners, but it requires everyone's cooperation. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward hesitantly. Doctor, my husband says you saved his leg last winter. Is that true? Ruth nodded. Medical emergencies don't recognize boundaries. I took an oath to heal whoever needed healing. One by one, other townspeople came forward with similar stories. Ruth had been secretly caring for the entire community while they scorned her publicly. The revelation transformed their understanding completely. Commissioner Hartwell watched the interaction with interest. Dr. Thompson, your medical work will be crucial to the treaty's success. Are you prepared to serve as territorial health officer? Ruth looked around at the faces surrounding her. People who had wanted her dead an hour ago now looked to her for salvation. The irony was not lost on her. I accept, on one condition. The position includes authority to establish an integrated medical training program. We need doctors from all communities. Granted, Hartwell replied immediately. Chief Running Bear gestured toward his waiting warriors. My people bring gifts for the new territory, seeds for planting, horses for breeding, knowledge for sharing. Ruth felt tears threatening as Red Feather's dream took tangible form. He had envisioned exactly this moment, two peoples choosing cooperation over conflict. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the town. The gallows stood empty and abandoned, a reminder of how close they had come to destroying everything. But now federal commissioners prepared treaty documents while Comanche warriors waited patiently for a new chapter in frontier history to begin. Ruth Thompson, no longer a condemned woman, stood ready to heal whatever needed healing. The treaty signing took place as the sun touched the western horizon. Commissioner Hartwell spread the documents across a makeshift table constructed from sawhorses and planks. The same wood that had built Ruth's gallows now served the cause of peace. Chief Running Bear approached the table with ceremonial dignity. Behind him, his warriors remained mounted but relaxed, their weapons lowered in a gesture of trust. Ruth stood between the two worlds, literally and figuratively. Her presence bridged the gap that had seemed impossible to cross just hours before. "Before we proceed," she said clearly, "there's something everyone needs to understand about Red Feather's death." The crowd fell silent. Even the horses seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Ruth opened Red Feather's journal to a page marked with a strip of leather. "My husband wasn't just a peace negotiator. He was an official representative of the United States government." Commissioner Hartwell nodded solemnly. Red Feather held a federal commission. His murder was an act of treason. The words hit the crowd like thunder. They had assumed Red Feather was just another Comanche warrior. Learning he was a federal agent changed everything. "Our marriage wasn't just personal," Ruth continued. "It was part of the peace mission, a symbolic union between two peoples working toward the same goal." She looked directly at the spot where Mayor Blanchard had stood before being taken away. "That's why he had to be eliminated. Peace threatened certain profitable enterprises." Chief Running Bear stepped forward. "My son died for his beliefs, but his spirit lives in this agreement." Hawk produced additional documents from his saddlebags, official correspondence with federal seals, letters of introduction, commission papers bearing Red Feather's name and signature. "The peace mission was authorized by Congress itself," Hawk announced. "Dr. Thompson and Red Feather were selected specifically for their unique qualifications." Ruth felt the weight of revelation settling over the crowd. She hadn't been the fallen woman who chose shame over respectability. She had been a federal agent carrying out official duties. Commissioner Hartwell began reading the treaty terms aloud. Each provision reflected Red Feather's careful planning and Ruth's medical expertise. Article 1. Establishment of Joint Governance Council with equal representation. Chief Running Bear placed his mark beside Red Feather's signature, already inscribed on the document. Article 2. Creation of integrated educational system with instruction in multiple languages. Ruth signed her name as Territorial Health Officer and Education Coordinator. Article 3. Establishment of shared medical facilities serving all residents without distinction. The crowd watched in fascination as history unfolded before them. This wasn't just a local peace agreement. It was a federal experiment that could reshape the entire frontier. Little Fox tugged at Ruth's dress. "Teacher Ruth, does this mean we can go to school with all the children?" "Yes, sweetheart. All children learning together just as Red Feather dreamed." Mrs. Henderson approached hesitantly. "Dr. Thompson, I owe you an apology. We all do." Ruth shook her head gently. "We all did what we thought was right with the information we had. Now we have better information." The cholera outbreak had been contained through Ruth's quick intervention. Only 4 cases total, all successfully treated. Her medical expertise had saved the town from disaster. Deputy Collins stepped forward, still processing his former boss's betrayal. "Ma'am, I need to ask, how long have you been treating folks in secret?" "Since my 2nd week in Cedar Ridge. Medical emergencies don't wait for social acceptance." Ruth had documented every case in detailed journals. broken bones, infections, difficult births, childhood fevers. She had been the town's true doctor while hiding behind the facade of a simple laundress. Commissioner Hartwell sealed the treaty with official wax and ribbon. This document establishes the Cedar Ridge Territory as the first integrated community in Texas. Success here could influence policy across the entire frontier. Chief Running Bear gestured toward his waiting warriors. "My people bring gifts to celebrate new beginnings." The Comanche riders approached in formation, each carrying bundles wrapped in decorated leather. Seeds for new crops, medicinal herbs Ruth had requested, tools crafted by master artisans, but the most significant gift was knowledge, maps of water sources, information about seasonal patterns, survival techniques developed over generations. "We offer what we know," Chief Running Bear said simply, "in exchange for what you know." Ruth realized this was Red Feather's vision made manifest. Not conquest or submission, but genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared benefit. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The gallows cast long shadows across the street, but they no longer seemed threatening. They had become a reminder of how close hatred had come to destroying hope. Hawk approached Ruth as the ceremony concluded. "Your husband would be proud." He knew this day would come, even when it seemed impossible. Commissioner Hartwell packed the signed treaty carefully. "Dr. Thompson, you'll need to establish the medical school quickly. Washington is watching this experiment closely." Ruth looked around at the transformed town. People who had scorned her now sought her leadership. Children who had been taught to fear each other played together in the street. "The Red Feather Institute will open within a month," she promised. "Our first class will include students from both communities." As darkness fell, lanterns were lit throughout Cedar Ridge. But for the first time in years, they weren't lit in fear of attack. They were lit in celebration of a new beginning. The 200 Comanche warriors began their journey home, their mission of justice complete. They had witnessed the fulfillment of Red Feather's dream and Ruth's vindication. Peace had come to Cedar Ridge, not through violence or conquest, but through truth, courage, and the power of one woman's refusal to abandon hope. 3 days after the treaty signing, Ruth stood in the Cedar Ridge courthouse for Mayor Blanchard's formal trial. The same building where she had been condemned now served as the stage for true justice. Federal Judge Morrison had arrived from Austin with a full legal contingent. This wasn't a frontier tribunal driven by emotion and prejudice. This was federal court with all its procedural gravity. Blanchard sat at the defendant's table, his former confidence completely shattered. The evidence against him filled 3 wooden crates. Red Feather's journal was only the beginning. The defendant stands accused of weapons trafficking, conspiracy against federal peace efforts, and the murder of Red Feather, a commissioned federal agent, Judge Morrison announced. Ruth took the witness stand first. Her testimony was precise and devastating. Red Feather documented every weapon sale in his journal, dates, quantities, buyers. Mayor Blanchard sold rifles to Chief Black Wolf's war party knowing they would be used against innocent settlers. She opened Red Feather's journal to specific pages. March 15th, 20 Spencer rifles. April 2nd, 50 rounds of ammunition. May 7th, additional weapons and powder. The courtroom listened in stunned silence. Blanchard had profited from both sides of the conflict while publicly calling for war. Hawk testified next, his federal marshal credentials lending weight to every word. Red Feather was investigating illegal weapons trafficking when he was killed. His murder was designed to protect Mayor Blanchard's criminal enterprise. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing unexplained income, witness testimony from weapons buyers, physical evidence of the illegal trade. But Ruth's most powerful testimony concerned the broader conspiracy. Mayor Blanchard knew that peace would end his profitable weapons sales. He systematically sabotaged every attempt at negotiation between our communities. She detailed how Blanchard had intercepted peace overtures, spread false information about Comanche intentions, and deliberately escalated tensions whenever diplomacy seemed possible. My husband died because he represented everything Mayor Blanchard feared, an end to profitable conflict. Chief Running Bear was called as a witness, his testimony delivered in careful English that commanded respect throughout the courtroom. Red Feather spoke often of the weapons being sold to war parties. He knew these sales made peace impossible. The chief explained how rogue bands had used the illegal weapons to attack both settler and Comanche communities, making each side blame the other for escalating violence. Mayor Blanchard created the very conflicts he claimed to fight against. Deputy Collins testified reluctantly about his former boss's activities. His voice shook as he described being ordered to look the other way during suspicious nighttime meetings. I thought he was protecting the town. I didn't realize he was destroying it. The financial evidence proved particularly damning. Bank records showed deposits coinciding exactly with documented weapon sales. Blanchard's wealth had grown substantially, while Cedar Ridge struggled with constant conflict. Ruth presented the medical evidence next. Her secret treatment records showed the true cost of the ongoing violence. Gunshot wounds, burn injuries, trauma cases from both communities. Every weapon Mayor Blanchard sold eventually wounded someone I had to treat. He profited from suffering while I tried to heal it. The courtroom fell silent as she described treating children injured in attacks carried out with illegally sold weapons. The human cost of Blanchard's greed was staggering. Commissioner Hartwell testified about the broader implications. The Cedar Ridge territory represents a new model for frontier governance. Mayor Blanchard's actions threatened a federal initiative with national significance. Judge Morrison examined Red Feather's commission papers personally. The federal seal was authentic, the signatures verified. Red Feather's murder was unquestionably an act of treason. Dr. Thompson, the judge said, please describe the current state of your peace mission. Ruth stood with quiet dignity. The treaty has been implemented successfully. Medical care is being provided to all residents regardless of background. Educational integration has begun. The cholera outbreak has been contained. She gestured toward the gallery where townspeople sat beside Comanche observers. Former enemies now work together for common benefit. That's Red Feather's true legacy. Blanchard finally spoke in his own defense, his words desperate and bitter. I was protecting this town from savages. Everything I did was for the safety of civilized people. Judge Morrison's expression remained impassive. Mayor Blanchard, you sold weapons to those same people you claim to have been protecting against. Your actions increased danger to every resident of Cedar Ridge. The defense had no credible response to the evidence. Financial records, witness testimony, and Red Feather's detailed documentation created an unassailable case. Ruth watched Blanchard's final collapse with sadness rather than satisfaction. He had been consumed by fear and greed, unable to see the possibility of something better. Red Feather believed that even his enemies could choose a different path, she said quietly. Mayor Blanchard rejected that possibility. Judge Morrison retired for deliberation, though the outcome was never in doubt. The evidence was too comprehensive, the testimony too consistent. When court reconvened, the verdict was swift and final. Guilty on all charges. The defendant will be transferred to federal prison in Austin to serve 25 years for weapons trafficking, conspiracy, and the murder of a federal agent. Ruth felt no triumph in Blanchard's downfall. Justice had been served, but at tremendous cost. Red Feather was still gone, and nothing could bring him back. As Blanchard was led away in shackles, Ruth stepped outside the courthouse. The town that had tried to hang her now looked to her for leadership and healing. The real work was just beginning. 1 month after Blanchard's conviction, Ruth stood before the half-constructed building that would become the Red Feather Institute. Hammers rang across Cedar Ridge as both settler and Comanche workers labored side by side on the territory's first integrated medical school. The transformation of the town was remarkable. Where once suspicious glances and whispered threats had defined daily life, now genuine cooperation flourished. The gallows had been torn down, its wood repurposed for school desks. Little Fox and Bright Star worked alongside settler children, mixing clay for the building's foundation. Their laughter carried across the construction site, a sound that would have been impossible just weeks before. Dr. Thompson, called James Patterson, the former bank manager who now served as the territory's treasurer. The federal funding has arrived, enough to complete construction and purchase medical equipment. Ruth nodded, checking items off her carefully prepared list. Surgical instruments, pharmaceutical supplies, anatomical charts, microscopes. Everything needed to train a new generation of frontier physicians. Chief Running Bear approached, leading a group of young Comanche men and women. "These are my finest students," he announced. "They wish to learn your healing ways." Among them was Red Feather's younger brother, Standing Wolf. He bore a striking resemblance to his fallen sibling, but his eyes held hope instead of the wariness that had marked Red Feather's early interactions with settlers. "I want to continue my brother's work," Standing Wolf said in careful English. He believed healing could unite our peoples. Ruth felt her throat tighten with emotion. "He would be proud of your choice." Mrs. Henderson arrived with a wagon full of supplies donated by townspeople: blankets, food, books, anything that might support the school's mission. The same woman who had once thrown coins at Ruth's feet now served as her most dedicated volunteer. "My Sarah wants to be a doctor like you," Mrs. Henderson said, referring to her teenage daughter. "She says watching you work inspired her." The change in community attitudes was profound but not universal. Some settlers remained skeptical of the integration experiment. A few families had left Cedar Ridge entirely, unable to accept the new reality. Deputy Collins, now serving as territorial sheriff, approached with his daily security report. "No incidents to report, Doctor. The joint patrols are working well." The joint patrols were Hawk's innovation. Teams of settler and Comanche law enforcement working together to maintain order across the territory. Former enemies now protected each other's families. Ruth walked through the town's main street, observing the changes. The general store displayed signs in both English and Comanche. The saloon had been converted into a community meeting hall. Children played games that mixed traditions from both cultures. At the medical clinic, Ruth found her first integrated class of students. 12 young people, 6 from each community, learning basic medical principles together. They bent over textbooks with shared concentration. "Today we study wound care," Ruth announced. "The human body heals the same way regardless of who owns it." She demonstrated proper cleaning and dressing techniques using volunteers from both communities. The students took notes carefully, asking intelligent questions that showed genuine dedication to learning. Sarah Henderson raised her hand. "Dr. Thompson, why didn't anyone try integration before?" Ruth considered the question carefully. "Because people feared what they didn't understand. Fear makes cooperation seem impossible." Standing Wolf added his perspective. "My brother said fear was just ignorance wearing war paint." The class laughed at Red Feather's wisdom, and Ruth felt his presence strongly. He had envisioned exactly this scene. Young people from different backgrounds learning together, building bridges instead of walls. After class, Ruth walked to Red Feather's grave. The simple wooden marker had been replaced with a proper stone memorial bearing inscriptions in both languages. Fresh flowers appeared daily, placed by people from throughout the territory. Hawk found her there as the sun began to set. His duties as territorial marshal kept him constantly traveling, but he always returned to Cedar Ridge. "Washington is pleased with our progress," he reported. "They're considering similar experiments in other frontier territories." Ruth touched Red Feather's headstone gently. "He always said his dream would spread beyond our borders." "The medical school applications are coming in from across Texas. Seems word is getting out about what we're building here." The Red Feather Institute was attracting attention throughout the region. Young people who had never imagined becoming doctors were applying for admission. The promise of integrated medical training drew students from communities that had never cooperated before. Ruth's own reputation had grown beyond the territory. Medical journals published her papers on frontier healthcare. Universities invited her to lecture on integrated medical education. She had become a symbol of what was possible when knowledge transcended prejudice. But her greatest satisfaction came from daily work with her students. Watching them master surgical techniques, learn diagnostic skills, and develop the compassion that marked true healers. The cholera outbreak had been completely contained through their coordinated response. No deaths, minimal spread, swift recovery. It was a model that other communities were eager to replicate. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ruth made her way home to the small house behind the clinic. It was modest but comfortable, filled with medical books and Red Feather's personal belongings. She opened his journal to the final entry, written the night before his death. Ruth carries the future in her hands. When I am gone, she will build what I could only dream. Trust her wisdom. Follow her example. Let her healing touch reach across every divide. Ruth closed the journal and looked out her window toward the construction site where the medical school was taking shape. Red Feather's dream was becoming reality, one student at a time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to heal and teach and build. But tonight, Ruth felt the deep satisfaction of work well begun and promises kept. 6 months after the treaty signing, Ruth watched her first graduating class receive their medical certificates. The Red Feather Institute's main hall buzzed with proud families from both communities, their differences dissolved in shared celebration. Sarah Henderson stepped forward to receive her certification as a certified medical assistant. Her mother wept openly as Ruth placed the official document in her daughter's hands. "You've earned this through dedication and skill," Ruth announced to the graduates. "Now go heal the world." Standing Wolf had excelled beyond all expectations, mastering both traditional healing methods and modern medical techniques. His combination of ancient wisdom and scientific knowledge made him uniquely qualified to serve both communities. The graduation ceremony marked more than individual achievement. It represented the successful completion of Red Feather's vision. Former enemies had studied together, learned together, and would now serve together. Commissioner Hartwell had returned from Austin specifically for the ceremony. "The Cedar Ridge territory has exceeded every expectation," he announced to the assembled crowd. "Applications for similar programs are pouring in from across the frontier." Ruth felt deep satisfaction as she looked over her students. They would carry the principles of integrated medicine to communities throughout Texas, spreading Red Feather's dream far beyond the borders of their small territory. After the ceremony, families gathered for a shared feast. Comanche recipes mixed with settler dishes created a menu that represented their blended community. Children played games that combined traditions from both cultures. Chief Running Bear approached Ruth during the celebration. "My son's spirit lives in these young healers. You have honored his memory beyond measure." The chief had become one of Ruth's strongest supporters, often bringing traditional healing knowledge to share with her students. His presence at the Institute legitimized the program within Comanche society. Hawk pulled Ruth aside with news from his latest patrol. 3 more territories have requested federal assistance in establishing integrated communities. They want to replicate what we've built here. The success of Cedar Ridge was becoming legendary across the frontier. Traders brought stories of the town where former enemies had learned to prosper together. Other communities wanted to experience the same transformation. Ruth's medical innovations had proven equally revolutionary. Her integrated approach, combining traditional and modern techniques, achieved better patient outcomes than either method alone. Medical journals published her findings, spreading knowledge throughout the profession. The town itself had transformed completely. Where once suspicious silence had dominated interactions, now genuine friendships flourished. Intermarriage between communities was becoming common, creating families that truly bridged both worlds. Mrs. Henderson had opened a boarding house specifically for medical students, welcoming young people from communities hundreds of miles away. Her establishment became known throughout the territory for its warmth and hospitality. Deputy Collins, now Sheriff Collins, reported crime statistics that impressed territorial authorities. Violence had dropped to nearly zero. Property crimes were almost non-existent. The integrated patrols had created a culture of mutual protection and respect. Ruth visited Red Feather's grave that evening, as had become her custom after every major milestone. The memorial site had grown into a peaceful garden where people from both communities came to reflect and remember. "We did it," she whispered to his headstone. "Everything you dreamed is coming true." Fresh flowers covered the memorial, placed there by grateful patients, successful students, and townspeople whose lives had been transformed by his vision of peace. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Dr. Elizabeth Garrett from the Boston Medical College, Ruth's former mentor, had traveled to Texas specifically to observe the integrated medical program. "I had to see this miracle for myself," Dr. Garrett announced. "Your reputation has reached medical circles throughout the East." Ruth gave her mentor a complete tour of the institute. Dr. Garrett observed classes where Comanche healing traditions were taught alongside modern surgical techniques. She watched integrated student teams treating patients with remarkable efficiency and compassion. "This is revolutionary," Dr. Garrett said after observing a complex surgical procedure performed by a mixed team. "You've created something entirely new in medical education." The visit validated everything Ruth had worked to achieve. Recognition from her former institution proved that the Red Feather Institute was producing graduates who could practice anywhere in the country. Applications for the next class had increased dramatically. Young people from across Texas and beyond wanted to experience the unique training offered in Cedar Ridge. Ruth had to implement competitive selection processes to manage the overwhelming demand. The territorial government had designated Cedar Ridge as the official model for frontier integration. Federal officials regularly visited to study their methods and document their successes. Ruth established satellite clinics in neighboring communities, staffed by her graduates and supported by the main institute. The healing influence of Red Feather's vision spread steadily across the region. Standing Wolf had emerged as a natural teacher, helping to train new students while maintaining his medical practice. His bilingual abilities and deep understanding of both cultures made him invaluable to the program's continued expansion. The economic impact of integration had proven equally impressive. Trade between communities flourished. Joint agricultural projects increased crop yields. Shared resources eliminated waste and duplication. Ruth's evening rounds took her through a town that bore little resemblance to the suspicious, divided community she had first encountered. Children played together in the streets. Families shared meals and celebrations. Former enemies had become genuine neighbors and friends. As she completed her rounds, Ruth reflected on the remarkable journey from that terrible morning when she had faced the gallows. Fear and hatred had nearly destroyed everything, but truth and courage had prevailed. The Red Feather Institute stood as a permanent monument to the power of knowledge over ignorance, healing over harm, cooperation over conflict. Red Feather's dream had not only survived his death, but had grown beyond anything he might have imagined possible. 1 year after the treaty signing, Ruth stood before a classroom of 40 students representing 12 different communities across Texas. The Red Feather Institute had outgrown its original building twice, requiring constant expansion to meet demand. The morning lesson focused on epidemic prevention, a subject that had gained Ruth national recognition after her successful containment of the cholera outbreak. Students from as far away as Louisiana and New Mexico had come to learn her integrated medical approach. "Disease recognizes no boundaries," Ruth explained to her attentive class. Neither should our response to it. Among her students sat Mary Cloudwalker, a young Kiowa woman who had walked 300 miles to reach the institute. Beside her, Thomas Mueller from the German settlements near Austin took careful notes in 2 languages. The diversity of her student body reflected the institute's growing reputation. Cherokee, Apache, Mexican, German, Irish, and African American students learned together, their shared dedication to healing transcending every other difference. Standing Wolf entered the classroom with the day's patient roster. His role had evolved from student to assistant director, helping Ruth manage the institute's expanding operations. 18 new patients this morning, he reported, including a delegation from the Seminole Nation requesting consultation on establishing their own integrated medical program. Ruth's influence was spreading across the entire frontier. Tribal leaders, territorial governors, and federal officials regularly sought her advice on healthcare policy and community integration. After morning lectures, Ruth made her rounds through the expanded hospital wing. The original 2-bed clinic had grown into a 40-bed facility serving patients from hundreds of miles away. In the children's ward, she found little Fox assisting with patient care. The young girl who had once hidden in the woods to learn English now served as a translator for Comanche patients, her bilingual skills invaluable to the medical staff. "Dr. Ruth," little Fox said proudly, "I helped deliver a baby this morning. Mrs. Running Deer says I have healing hands." Ruth smiled at her former student's enthusiasm. Little Fox had announced her intention to become a doctor, following in her teacher's footsteps. The hospital's success had attracted attention from major medical institutions. The Johns Hopkins Hospital had sent representatives to study Ruth's integrated treatment methods. Harvard Medical School had offered her a department chair, which she had politely declined. Ruth's afternoon was interrupted by the arrival of unexpected visitors. A group of federal officials from Washington had come to observe the Institute's operations firsthand. Secretary of the Interior Columbus Delano himself led the delegation, his presence indicating the national significance of Ruth's work. "Dr. Thompson," Secretary Delano announced, "President Grant has asked me to personally evaluate your program for potential expansion nationwide." The implications were staggering. If successful, the Cedar Ridge model could be implemented across all Western territories, fundamentally changing how diverse communities interacted. Ruth conducted a complete tour of the facilities. The delegation observed surgery performed by integrated medical teams, witnessed the peaceful cooperation between formerly hostile communities, and reviewed patient outcomes that exceeded national averages. "Remarkable," Secretary Delano murmured as they watched Comanche and settler students collaborating on a complex medical procedure. "I've never seen anything like this level of cooperation." Chief Running Bear joined the tour, explaining how traditional healing knowledge complemented modern medical techniques. His presence demonstrated the genuine partnership that made the program successful. "My people have learned much from Dr. Thompson," the chief said diplomatically, "but she has also learned from us." Knowledge flows both ways. The delegation spent 3 days documenting every aspect of the Institute's operations. They interviewed patients, students, faculty, and community leaders, seeking to understand how such transformation had been achieved. Ruth's evening meetings with the federal officials focused on practical implementation challenges. How could other communities replicate Cedar Ridge's success? What resources would be required? How could resistance be overcome? "The key is starting with healing," Ruth explained. "Medical emergencies force people to see beyond their prejudices. Saving lives creates bonds that transcend cultural differences." Secretary Delane was particularly interested in the economic benefits of integration. Trade between communities had increased dramatically. Agricultural cooperation had boosted food production. Shared resources had eliminated wasteful competition. "The financial case for integration is as compelling as the moral case," Ruth noted. "Cooperation is simply more efficient than conflict." On their final day, the delegation witnessed the Institute's most powerful demonstration. A medical emergency brought in a young settler boy who had been severely injured in a farming accident. The response was immediate and coordinated. Comanche healers provided pain management using traditional medicines. Settler doctors performed surgery using modern techniques. Students from multiple communities assisted with precision and compassion. Within hours, the boy's life had been saved through the combined efforts of people who might have been enemies just 2 years before. Secretary Delano watched the seamless cooperation with obvious amazement. "This is what America could become," he said quietly to Ruth. "This is the future we should be building." Before departing, the delegation made formal commitments. Federal funding would support similar institutes in 5 additional territories. The Red Feather model would be officially endorsed as national policy for frontier integration. Ruth felt Red Feather's presence strongly as she watched the federal officials depart. His dream was about to become reality on a scale neither of them had dared imagine. That evening, she walked through the thriving community that had once tried to hang her for loving across racial lines. Children played in streets where fear had once reigned. Families shared meals across cultural boundaries. Former enemies had become genuine friends and neighbors. The Red Feather Institute's influence would soon reach every corner of the American frontier, carrying a message of hope, healing, and the transformative power of choosing cooperation over conflict. Ruth's journey from condemned widow to national leader was nearly complete. 5 years had passed since Ruth Thompson stood on the gallows facing death. Now she stood before the largest graduating class in the Red Feather Institute's history, watching 127 young doctors receive their certificates from what had become the most renowned medical school on the American frontier. The ceremony took place in the town square where her execution had once been planned. The space now hosted a beautiful memorial garden surrounding Red Feather's monument, which bore inscriptions in 7 different languages, representing the diverse communities served by the Institute. Little Fox, now 18 and one of the graduating doctors, stepped forward to deliver the class speech. Her journey from hidden student to accomplished physician embodied everything Red Feather had dreamed possible. 5 years ago, learning to read was dangerous, Little Fox said, her voice carrying across the packed square. Today, we graduate as healers ready to serve anyone who needs healing. Ruth watched with profound satisfaction as representatives from 43 different communities applauded the graduates. Cherokee doctors who would serve Apache patients, German physicians trained in Mexican healing traditions, African-American surgeons fluent in Comanche medicine. Standing Wolf had earned his advanced certification and would soon depart to establish a satellite institute in Colorado Territory. His combination of traditional knowledge and modern training made him uniquely qualified to replicate Cedar Ridge's success elsewhere. The statistical achievements were remarkable, but told only part of the story. The Red Feather Institute had trained over 500 doctors in 5 years. Infant mortality across the region had dropped by 60%. Epidemic containment protocols developed at the Institute were now standard practice throughout the American West. But the deeper transformation was cultural. Cedar Ridge had become a pilgrimage destination for communities seeking to bridge their own divides. Delegations arrived weekly to study how former enemies had learned to prosper together. Chief Running Bear, now in his 70s but still vigorous, took the podium for the ceremonial blessing. His presence legitimized the Institute within every tribal community, ensuring continued cooperation across cultural lines. "My son Red Feather planted seeds in the hearts of all who knew him," the chief said. "Dr. Thompson has tended those seeds until they grew into this mighty forest of healing." Ruth felt tears threatening as she looked across the crowd. Mrs. Henderson sat beside Comanche elders, their friendship genuine and deep. Sarah Henderson, now Dr. Sarah Henderson, ran her own clinic serving mixed communities along the Mexican border. Hawk approached the podium wearing his territorial marshal's badge. His law enforcement innovations had proven as successful as Ruth's medical programs, creating peace across thousands of square miles. 5 years ago, this region was torn by violence and hatred, Hawk announced. Today, it stands as proof that cooperation is always possible when people choose courage over fear. The afternoon brought Ruth's most cherished tradition. She walked to Red Feather's memorial with a small group of her original students, sharing quiet memories of the man whose vision had transformed the frontier. "He would be amazed by what you've built," Standing Wolf said, placing fresh flowers on his brother's grave. Ruth touched the monument's smooth stone surface. "We built it together, all of us." The memorial garden had become a place of pilgrimage, visited by thousands of people seeking inspiration for their own community challenges. Fresh flowers appeared daily, placed by grateful patients, successful students, and leaders from communities across the region. As evening approached, Ruth made her final rounds through the Institute's expanded campus. The original single building had grown into a complex of hospitals, research facilities, and teaching centers that sprawled across several acres. In the children's hospital, she found young patients from a dozen different backgrounds playing together while recovering from various ailments. Their laughter filled corridors that had once echoed with the sounds of conflict and division. The research wing buzzed with activity as advanced students collaborated on projects that combined traditional healing wisdom with cutting-edge medical science. Their discoveries were revolutionizing frontier healthcare and earning recognition from major medical institutions worldwide. Ruth's office overlooked the town square, where her transformation from condemned widow to celebrated leader had taken place. The gallows site was now marked by a fountain surrounded by benches where people from all communities gathered to share stories and solve problems together. Her desk held correspondence from medical schools, government officials, and community leaders around the world. The Red Feather model was being studied and adapted from Canada to Mexico, from Europe to Asia. A knock on her door interrupted her evening reflections. Little Fox entered carrying a leather journal similar to the one Red Feather had kept. "I'm starting my own documentation," Little Fox announced, "recording everything we're learning as we establish new institutes." Ruth smiled at her protege's dedication. Red Feather would approve. Knowledge preserved is knowledge that can change the world. As night fell over Cedar Ridge, Ruth walked through streets that bore no resemblance to the suspicious, divided community she had first encountered. Children played games that mixed traditions from multiple cultures. Families shared evening meals across every conceivable boundary. The Red Feather Institute's influence now reached across continents, but its heart remained in this small Texas town where one woman's refusal to abandon hope had transformed hatred into healing. Ruth paused at her cabin door, looking back toward the memorial garden where Red Feather rested. His dream had not only survived his death, but had grown beyond anything either of them had dared imagine. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to build bridges across every divide that separated human beings from each other. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.